Welcome to the Cherish and Conquer podcast, the show dedicated to celebrating female entrepreneurs' strength, resilience, and innovation. Be inspired by stories of women and what they cherish to help them conquer against all odds. Every other week, you will learn from remarkable women on how they navigate challenges, uphold their values, and create sustainable success. And now, here's your host, Jim Rembach.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cherish and Conquer podcast. I'm looking forward to the discussion that we're getting ready to have because it's about something that I think probably in my youth I wasn't really good at being able to effectively leverage, control, apply with skill, all of those types of things. And it's really about, purpose, understanding cause, connection, how to help others and bring that out in themselves, work collaboratively with, a team, whether it's internal or external, connect with customers. There's all these different factors that come into it. And who's going to help us with that, guidance and share of some of those insights and know-how? It's Alise Cortez. Thanks, Alise, for coming to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Jim. It's great. It's, as I said before we got on, it's great to be on the other side of the mic.
Yes. So, and hopefully you'll get an opportunity to share a little bit about that and some of the, most impactful things that you've learned in your own, podcast. But before we get to that, if you could, please tell everyone a little bit more about how you're making a difference in the people's lives that you work with today.
Well, I certainly hope I'm making a difference, right? But every once in a while I get some really wonderful glimmers that I am, and it's incredibly gratifying. So really what we're doing at Gusto now is we are activating meaning and purpose in leadership and cultures. And what that really means, Jim, is that we are teaching people how to access their own meaning systems, learning how to be able to better connect with their own higher emotions that really fuel them with energy and charge, joy and power. And once we do that, then we can really turn on their creativity, their ability to and desire to want to really dig in and give more of themselves to their work effort and to their organization. And ideally, then they feel more unified and connected to the people that they're working with. So really, at the end of the day, we're impacting leadership and culture.
That, when you say it in that context, impacting leadership and culture, and even many of the things that you use to describe, in all fairness and with all due respect, is thousands of people who are impacting culture and transformation could say the exact same things, right? Mm-hmm. So how is what you're doing different? And you've actually have a book called the Great Revitalization. I almost said it incorrectly. The Great Revitalization. We're talking about great resignations. We talk about employee engagement. I think yet another statistic says it's all-time low, all of those types of things. So, you talk about the spend associated with this particular issue. Even when you start getting into employee recognition, it's literally in the billions of dollars, but yet it's not making a positive impact. Help us make sense of this.
Yeah, one, I would say a few things to that, Jim. You're right. Companies spend a boatload of money on this because it's a problem. I do think that part of the issue is people are very resistant to learn and change. They want to just hang with what they've known. So you do need to reinforce it. It can't be just a, one and done kind of thing. It needs to be an ongoing effort within the organization to learn what's being taught. But you asked me to distinguish my particular way of navigating leadership and culture, and specifically, it is meaning and purpose. And so really, for example, why is my company called Gusto now? Well, how many companies do you know that have Gusto in their name? What we're really out to do is really help people to enliven themselves from the inside out, to find and connect with their passion again, to learn what it is, to be able to inspire others, to be able to be part of it, or to be able to communicate in a way that allows people to really understand, hey, we're part of something magnificent here. This is worth my time. This is worth this part of my one precious life. It's not about managing spreadsheets. It's not about, even although I do teach how to meaningfully delegate and such, there's always going to be a sprinkling of how do we do this in a way? How do we communicate in a way and exist in this company in a way that actually leaves people better and inspires them, and they leave more energized than they do depleted. And I don't know that too many organizations that are teaching leadership are really focused on those particular kinds of elements.
Okay, so you mentioned Gusto now as a name, but isn't it also a framework?
It is, yes. It's lots of things. Actually, I have a Grab Your Gusto program. That's one of my keynote speeches. It is a framework. It is an operating system. It's a philosophy. You're right. It's a lot of things.
Okay. Needless to say, and you kind of hit on this a little bit, and maybe you can kind of open this understanding up a little bit more, is we're talking about transformation. We're talking about change. People don't like to do it. So the undertaking and the effort to be able to do it has to be, significant. And this reminds me of something that was said a few years back by a very wise business owner who ended up selling, 50 plus car dealerships for multiple $1 million sums. And we were talking about change and transformation. And he was talking specifically about it in the traditional church type of environment. And he was referencing the growth of non-denominational churches and how they're able to attract, people where the traditional churches were having difficulty being able to grow. And this is one thing that he said when he was talking about their ability to grow. And he said, their opportunity is they don't have 150 years of legacy to deal with. So when you start talking about transformation and change, regardless of toxicity levels and things like that, what can an organization, what can they expect, when they start talking about startup growth, those types of environments, and, new versus legacy and entrenchment and, entitlement. Kind of help us make sense of this.
Myrina.ai draws inspiration from the legendary Amazonian Queen Marina, embodying resilience and strategic brilliance. With our AI-powered SaaS platform, we equip women-led businesses for success in the evolving landscape of AI and business automation. As a partner and community for female-led businesses, Myrina.ai maximizes their potential using AI while providing essential support. Ready to amplify your success using AI with like-minded ladies? Register or learn more at Myrina.ai. And now, back to our interview.
Boy, that was a lot. I'm not really sure where to dive in on that one, Jim. You went in lots of different places there. Is there a certain place you want me to zero in? But I feel like there's a lot I could go with there.
Yeah, and you know what? Sometimes I do that. It's the creative.
Okay, good. All right.
The creative thinker in me.
All right, I can be creative too. Well, first let me say this. I want to back up and say something important about change.
Sure.
Change is, people say that people don't like to change, people don't change, but that's not entirely true. They will be happy to change when they have been convinced of why that's a good thing and why it's in their best interest. So I always like to say, I just was doing a change management initiative in a team building session earlier this week. If I, for example, come to your house and I park your favorite brand new car in your driveway and I pay for the insurance and the gas for a year, I'm guessing you might be okay with that change. Probably, right? It's when we don't have a say in the matter that change is really kind of interesting, and we don't really like the change, right? So the opportunity is to figure out, how do we situate the change, meet people where they are with the change, so that they can start to see how this what we're asking them to change to is actually better for them. And that takes a lot of work, and it takes getting on their same level and then helping paint the picture of what, and sometimes we discover in explaining that the change really isn't better for them. And then in which case I hope we go a different direction. So I wanted to say that first about change. That's really important, because otherwise, if you just say people don't like to change, there's no agency in that. So then back on what you were saying with this notion of, I forget how you said, safety or fear or something. I am amazed how many organizations have psychological safety issues. It's not safe to speak up, and there's so much that gets communicated when you're talking and sharing a pitch and the boss starts looking some other direction, that they really aren't on board with your idea. So that in some ways signals for you not to share another good idea. It's not safe to bring up new ideas. And I heard one of your other guests talking about this. Gosh, it's hard to be a leader today. There's so many expectations, and you are expected to be so well developed and so, not perfect, but pretty well, strong in many different ways. And so this isn't a bash on leaders. It's hard. You are on stage, as one of my other friends often says. So I'll just situate that when it comes to change and leadership and see where you want to take it next.
Okay. A lot of types of transformation processes talk about self-discovery, starting with self first. How does that play into what we're talking about here, especially when you think about senior level parts of the organization? If that doesn't happen, we talk about change and buy-in and transformation. And there's a book called Change the Way You Change, which talks about we need to have top down and bottom up. Both need to happen.
Yes, I agree with that. Yeah, well, so I just had a fantastic guest on my podcast, which is called Working on Purpose, Dr. Julia DeGangi. She's a neuropsychologist. And she was talking about, just the import of emotional energy. And what we talked about as well, and this is something I'm very aware of in my own work, is, so many people, first, let's start with this. Every single one of us human beings are walking wounded. The question is, to what extent are we aware of our wounds, and what are we doing to start to try to heal them? And so many people, especially, big leaders who have huge impact, oftentimes have no idea how wounded they are. They have no idea the shrapnel they're throwing across their organization. And so when they're trying to any kind of an initiative, they're not realizing how much they're undoing their own efforts because of they are spewing some of this hurt and pain that they've been carrying around themselves their whole lives. And so whatever they're trying to do can be less effective. So I'm a big fan, absolutely, of starting with the self, trying to understand what are my drivers, what are my motivations, what are my fears, what am I operating from? If we better understand those things, I think that is a critical place to start in any kind of transformation initiative, any kind of a change initiative, has to start there. And then you get the beliefs in there too.
So there's a lot of information that talks about rewards, recognition, extrinsic and intrinsic types of motivations. How does the Gusto Now framework approach be able to address that?
We're all about intrinsic motivation, which, of course, in my view, is the most powerful, strongest kind. Why? Because it is literally internally sourced, and it's internally directed according to what you value and what you care about. So everything that we're really doing is helping people to get access to their own internal motivational systems, the things that really matter to them. And that's through their meaning system. The meaning is always registered along their individual values. So if we can get people connected to how they're spending their days and what they're doing with their work in a way that they are aware of how it's meaningful, now what we've done is we've stoked their meaning system. Therefore, we have stoked their intrinsic motivation system. And it's individual and different for each and every human being. So we are totally interested in helping more people turn themselves on from the inside out than to reward them. Of course, everybody wants to get paid, right? Me too. but then that's an extrinsic motivation. So is, if you don't do this, I'll fire you. Or if you do this, I'll promote you. What we really care about is helping people to really want to be of service, to want to be able to give themselves, to want to help their fellow colleague or comrade, not to be, so much as convinced that they have to do it in order to keep their job. So almost everything that we do is intrinsic motivation.
Well, as you say that, I start thinking about, many different facets of the work that I do. And some of the work that I do is in the business-to-business space, sales, marketing, lead gen. And one of the pieces of research that talks about sales and sales enablement, sales effectiveness, and marketing talks about how 60% of all B2B sales opportunities are actually lost to no decision.
Interesting.
And so when you start looking at that motivational piece, one of the things that pulling other pieces of data starts bringing to light, and even in this particular research study that was part of this book called Jolt Effect, and talks about, this whole decision-making process and buyer journeys and things like that, is it said that the biggest risk that decision makers have within organizations, because the decision's no longer about me as an individual, it's much more encompassing than that, is that they have actually what they call FOMO, right? Which is fear of messing up.
Oh, okay.
And the fear of messing up is multifaceted, meaning that, hey, I've essentially championed this. I, brought this into the organization, or I sponsored it, or whatever the case may be, and I have to make sure that it's going to work because my reputation is on the line. My career
Yes.
is on the line. All of those things are on the line. And so to the point to where that is such a major concern that 60% of all sales opportunities are lost to no decision, meaning they just keep dealing with their problems.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So to me, when you start thinking about this whole motivational opportunity, I'd like to see it as such. Whether or not we're, an entrepreneur, a solopreneur, whether or not, we're trying to sell to another business or to individuals or whatever the case may be, if we don't understand those motivators like you're talking about, I think effectiveness and ineffectiveness becomes broad in its impact, one way or the other. What are your thoughts on that?
Definitely. And I also think so, as you were talking about the 60% of non-decision, I would say that there's a few things, and it's fascinating. I really do understand what you mean by that FOMO thing that you were talking about. And this is my reputation, and I don't want to mess up by bringing this organization in that maybe won't follow through or just mess things up worse. But what I would also say to that is that also tells me that whoever was presenting the solution really didn't connect with their actual problem in a way that made them believe that they really could solve it for them. So that might also just speak to ineffective salesmanship or whatever, just not really being clear about what is the client's problem and how can your solution actually come through for them. That's one thing that was going through my mind. But I can tell you this, just this last week, Jim, you'll find this interesting. I was referred into a university here in Texas. They're going through a bit of a reorg, and teams were changing. And so the VP who brought me in was referred to me by someone who also had worked with me before. So I already had a little bit of a leg up there because I was a known. And he was kicking off his new year and he was hurting. So what I said is, he said, let's do team building. I said, we're not just doing team building, but this is also change management. Anyway, so I said, I really think that before I come in on campus to do these retreats with your team, I need to be able to interview each and every one of them one-on-one to understand and get into their heads and their hearts. And then I can design the session to meet those needs. And he said, well, but I want to save some money. And I said, I'll forget it. I'll reduce my fee. I need to do the interviews. So I did the interviews and I realized, there was a lot of really, really hurt feelings and really just all kinds of major emotions swirling about. And so I designed the session to be able to have an open bit in there where there would be an open forum to really openly discuss these really raw emotions, which is scary for any leader to, imagine that they're going to do that. And so I did that for the two separate teams, one being folded in and then the full team, and it went great. And afterwards I said to him, thank you for trusting me. I did present what I was going to do in the retreat, so he knew what I was going to take his people through. But he could have said, "No, I don't want to do that," But he did it. He trusted me, and so there's, you do at some point. And so he did put his neck out, right, for me. But the results were fantastic. But he did have to trust me. He did, and the only thing that I would say to what we've been talking about is it has to be enough pain in there to be able to cause that motivational turn to say, okay, I'm willing to throw the dice, right? So if you're in an apathetic state and things are okay, they're not so bad, it's going to be really hard to get a decision on that. So what I found in my work is that most of the time when people hire us, there's some kind of a pain point that allows them to be able to stick their neck out.
Well, and I think you hit on an important point too, and why so many people want to cherish them, is referrals do build that trust factor up quite a bit.
Yeah.
That kudos for you to be able to get that, because I think that allowed you to execute, and be successful. So here's one question that I love to ask is, what inspired you to start your own business, and how does it align with the concept of cherish and conquer?
Okay, so the easy answer to the question, I started my practice really in 2003, which nicely coincided with the exact same time period that my daughter was born. And so at the time when I was married, my ex-husband had a big consulting job, he was the road warrior, was on the road. And I was like, somebody's got to be home base. If I work for myself, I've got a better chance of being able to control my schedule. So I did. So that's what launched it. And then really, it just really evolved over time. I would not say up until really, probably 6-7 years ago that I could move into the cherish and conquer realm, which is when I really found my way into the meaning and purpose. Well, my niche became meaning and purpose. And now what it is for me, Jim, is I get to live my purpose through the work that I'm doing by awakening people and organizations to their passion and their purpose, and then inspiring them to make a contribution worthy of their one precious life. Why? Because I needed that myself. So, we often, are ministering to others in the way that we needed to be ministered. So I cherish that I get to do work that is wildly meaningful to me, that is a direct expression of who I am in the world, and that in the process, I literally get to watch people's molecules change when I'm working with them, watching them transform. I really cherish that. And the conquering piece is, I'm so stubborn, Jim, that I tried working for another organization for a couple of years after I got divorced, and they taught me so much, and they were a great organization, great culture, good product and service, but I just can't work for somebody else. That's so conquering that all of the fears along the way of being able to do what I really wanted to do, and, make a living and pay the people that are helping me out to do this, and conquering all of that and developing and replacing them with other beliefs and mindsets that are higher serving. It's an ongoing life journey.
Thank you for sharing that. That's very insightful. I think a lot of times we kind of want to have it all together. That's the ideal, right? Before we start taking on some of the risks of, entrepreneurship. And my mother-in-law had made a comment to my wife around children and, being able to be an effective parent. And as she said, she goes, "You grow with them as much as they grow with you."
No doubt. No doubt.
So when you start talking about the being on your own and having your own business, and then you said you found the focus that you were on and that you actually help other organizations with right now, which is, part of the work that you're doing. What were you doing prior to that? How did that transition happen?
At the core of Myrina.ai is customization and the innovative AI you process, which uses AI to infuse your personality, style, and vision into cloning you and growing your business. Are you ready to amplify your success using AI with a community of fellow female entrepreneurs? Go to Myrina.ai today. And now, back to the interview.
Yeah, such a great question. So really how it happened, what happened was, I love that phrase, is so when I did my PhD research in meaning and work and identity, and I finished that in 2005, it just kind of sat for a bit. And then when I started teaching in college again, at the University of Phoenix first, and then Southern Methodist University in 2011, I got the academic bug again, the intellectual rigor that I love, and just swimming in that space of ideas and learning came back. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna augment my meaning and work and identity research that I did back for my PhD. And when I did that, I interviewed 115 men and women, and I found these 15 modes of engagement. When I looked at the level of meaning that they were experiencing along Maslow's hierarchy, and how the work either related to them as either expressing themselves, fitting with them, resonating, inseparable, in conflict, whatever, I found these 15 modes of engagement. And one of them, the second highest, was living your purpose. all the way down to the very, very least one, which is, and the most negative one, which is existential crisis. And people actually are walking around an existential crisis in their work. But once I got into that space, it was like, Jim, it was the coolest thing. It was like, the more I got into that, and it was like, I like to think about it as, it's like closing your eyes and just allowing yourself, you're supposed to figure out where you're supposed to go next. And where's the next lily pad that you step on? It's right here, like that. And every time that I kept getting further in that research, I was more and more convicted that this is something important. This is meaningful for me, and it's important to the world. So once I was on to the whole notion of meaning, and then I knew this was 2014. Then I knew that later that year, in December, I was going to go to India to present my results at a research conference and get academically published, which was important to me. Loved the idea of going to India. It was on my bucket list. But in November, just before I left, I got the chance to work with a brand new client. And they said, we want to do something celebratory around engagement, kind of finish our year. And I said, well, I have this brand new research. Would you like me to create a workshop around that? And said, yeah, you do that. That's great. So I did the workshop, and they absolutely loved it. And I was like high as a kite as I'm leaving this client site. I'm driving home, and my phone rings. And I kid you not, it's Voice America calling me. And they're saying, hey, we found you on LinkedIn. We went to your website. We see that you're a consultant, a speaker. You makes for a good host. Do you want to host your own show? And I held the phone away from my ear, and I was like, this is all connected. This is all connected, right? So I started hosting in February of 2015, and I called my show, and I still own the assistants today, Working on Purpose. So that just kept catalyzing my own journey to really go after, how do I help organizations to detect and articulate their purpose, and then help them weave that into their culture so that it strengthens all their operations and vitalizes them. And that's where I went. So it was this natural sort of process but you have to listen, right? You have to be willing to and able to listen to that quiet little whisper that's trying to tell you where to go next, that's important to you, and then be willing to do it, even if there aren't, immediate clients presenting themselves. And that's what I did.
I mean, good for you. I mean, you just talked about a whole lot of areas associated with anxiety and fear that a lot of people just won't venture into. And so I think part of that will keep them from actually hearing where to step next, is because, I mean, they don't even get close enough to it or even explore it. So when you start talking about that curiosity piece and when things started really turning up for you, how much did curiosity drive your next step on the lily pad?
Tremendously. But there was one other really powerful force that I have to honor and credit. And that's the D word called divorce. So I got divorced in 2016. And so when that happened, Jim, I had this whole clearing that I felt like I could step into. Like, it just was like, all right, you got a clear canvas. My daughter was 13 at that time, and so she was with me half the time. But I gave myself over to wherever it was that I felt curiosity calling me. Where did I feel compelled? So for my podcast, I read a book a week in preparation for the conversation, cover to cover. I take about 25 pages of typewritten notes as a researcher, which then allows me to keep writing my own books. So that whole process for me, Jim, I mean, I was getting so many ideas stirred up, and it just became impossible for me to ignore, this path, right? It was like this deafening. In fact, when I left the other consultancy that I went to work for 2 years after I first got divorced, and I was like, all right, I got to do this. I will never forgive myself if I don't attempt this path. It was July of 2018. And I was like, I promised myself 3 things. I'm going to draft my first book, which I did. I am going to create my own leadership program, which I did. And I'm going to start my own nonprofit, which I did. There was not a singular client who said, hey, I want to work with you or whatever. I just was so convicted that I did it. I went after it. And so it wasn't just curiosity. It was just, when you're high on purpose, it just, the confidence and the energy that comes with that is really incredible.
So I could say I've had flashes and moments of that, and I do seek what you're talking about. I think for me is finding, I think going solo and alone makes it a little bit difficult, meaning that, hey, I'm the only one with the fire and the purpose and all of that kind of stuff. How do you get to the point where you can find essentially kindred spirits, you can find partners, because you alluded to this a moment ago, even when you start talking about your own business. I need to find others that can be essentially on this bus, if you want to call it as such, with me, because you can't go it alone. I mean, you need to have, others as part of your team somehow, some way. How do you go about recruiting and finding those people? Because you kind of hit it on it a little bit, but there's got to be some type of, screening, expectation setting, all of these things that I know would also apply to if I'm wanting to grow a business.
Well, first, association is so powerful. So I happen to be a conscious capitalist. I also serve on the board of Conscious Capitalism here in Dallas. So that's a whole community of people that also really believe in business as a force for good to elevate humanity. So there's already a whole group of people that I associate with that already think like me and continue to inspire me and are also sources of good referrals for people to work with me, as well as people who might want our services and such. So I know you're talking about the vantage point of recruiting people, and what I have found is people, when I go out and speak, Jim, and talk about, this notion, I have a signature talk that I give, is scrap your guts to live with passion, work on purpose. People really opt into that message. It's enticing. It's like, yeah, I want that. So I haven't had a hard time really getting people who want to come work with me. In fact, I want to develop more business so I can bring on more people because I want to develop the team. So I haven't really had that so much per se. And that's really when your brand is strong, then that people should opt into or opt out of, that brand. And that's what's happened for me. But in addition to that, I was just thinking that, from the vantage point of, who do you actually surround yourself with? For me, I mean, being around other conscious capitalists, and I had an amazing guest on my show that I recorded. His name is Payam Zamani, and he's an Iranian immigrant who created with his brother AutoWeb and brought it to IPO in, I think, in 1999. An amazing human being, inspires me to no end, right? So I look for those kinds of people to make sure that I surround myself with, so that I can stay strong. And then inevitably, those people are connected to other really, really interesting people too, right? That become also sources of referrals and such. So I just, and I don't have a big team, so it's not like I'm, recruiting hundreds of people, but I just haven't found it hard to attract because of that.
I mean, that makes sense. We talk about, having and being part of a community, of like-minded individuals. And that's one of the things that we do at Myrna with Myrna's Army is like, hey, we're all, ladies who are, either have our own business or are part of a particular business and own, certain parts of the operation. And, it's amazing to me, especially when you start looking at collective knowledge. I was just a part of a group meeting and cohort the other day, where as people were talking, and you kind of said it a moment ago, even with the whole book thing, I'm sitting there and I'm taking notes and I'm even recording the session because all the different perspectives that get shared. It's like, I can't pay for an education like this. When you see people coming from all these different perspectives and wanting to help one another and, seeking information, it's something that I would dare to say, if you, as an individual, if you're not part of that, every single week, somehow, some way, and in multiple, instances, or, with, hey, like, for example, I'm even in a Bible study on Monday mornings. That's, essentially a sharing community where people are trying to support and help one another, and I have my business, meetings. I think it's if we don't do that, the whole isolation essentially starts collapsing in upon us. Is that something that you use as that motivation when you start talking about transformation? Is this whole collective nature and, mentorship and collective knowledge?
Definitely, right? Definitely. And yeah, and I too, I mean, I always have mentors myself, right? So one of my mentors, I'm very happy to share, is Dr. Lance Secretan. And he is an 85-year-old man who skis 100 days out of the year, kayaks 100 days out of the year, travels 100 days of the year, and continues working pretty much full time. And he's this beautiful spiritual man. So we align very much on inspirational leadership. And then that community comes with all kinds of other people that also we pour into each other and help. So that, to your point, that sort of that mentor group, I tap into that all the time. And then, of course, my guests, I learn so much from them. And then I also say that, you provide a service, I know, for women to I think it's, I'm not sure, I won't speak it, but I know that you certainly help women grow as well. And I also tap into that. And one thing that I've learned from that is, especially as a purpose entrepreneur, a conscious entrepreneur who is delivering a service that is based on my purpose, what I have learned is I have to learn and be able to speak how what it is, my gift, what it is I'm giving to the world actually meets the need of the client. So that is a meeting of communication. And I've learned the hard way over the years that this lofty way of talking about it doesn't actually necessarily meet where the client is. And so learning how to speak the language of what the client actually is saying is their problem and what they want in relation to what I want to share in my purpose has become a huge learning for me, a huge lesson for me. And I would have never learned that without being in a mentorship group, without being around coaches, without being around people who could be on the outside saying, hey, Alise, it looks like this from the outside. you might want to tweak this or fix this.
That's for sure. Okay, so how do you ensure that your business practices align with your core values and ethics?
And thankfully, I'm so grateful for this, Jim. My business is who I am. It is an absolute expression of me as a person, my personality, my values, and my purpose. And so it's, and what's interesting is people opt into it and they also opt way out of it. Like, I don't want anything, that's just not me. Right. And great. Right. So it is, and I'm not really sure how I've been able, I guess it's because maybe it's these people that I surround myself with, but it's not hard for me to stay honoring that track because it really is me. So I haven't had a problem with that.
Okay, so then I would dare to say that a lot of people that deal with the imposter syndrome, based on what you're talking about, you don't have an issue with, or would that be a false assumption?
No, I think most of us deal with the imposter syndrome. I didn't say that, Jim. Hang on a minute. No, I have days where I'm like, oh, I want to lift a million lives before I'm dropped into the ground. And then I have days when I'm like, but maybe I only get to 5. Maybe I can't. And it's just a natural thing. It ebbs and it flows. And so then, for me, exercise is really huge. I can then change, the makeup of my brain through exercise. And that makes a huge, huge difference. It changes the way I relate to stress, changes how I think about myself. And then, of course, being around these other groups that might also be saying, oh, today is a day. Yes, I can relate. But no, I still question, who am I to be doing the things that I'm doing or the things that I aspire to do? Absolutely.
So how do you maintain a healthy work-life balance as a woman in business, and what strategies have worked well for you?
I don't know that I'm such a great example of a healthy work-life balance, Jim. I do generally work 7 days a week, and that's my choice. I'm writing my 5th book, which is coming out this year. This is the first one that's co-authored. And so I feel a strong need to come through for my co-author, and he really wants us to come out this year. So I don't know that I would say that I'm a great example of work-life harmony or integration. However, what I would say is I don't necessarily distinguish work and life, because for me, a lot of time they're pretty much the same thing. So it's not like I'm living or I'm working. Oftentimes when I'm working, I'm living at my finest. So it's just that a lot of that activity really does fall into the bucket of work. But again, it's my choice because I do want to make a difference. I want to matter. I want to make an impact, and I want to keep creating. And I like working.
I think that confidence and the clarity of knowing where you are has a huge part of it. You know, one of the things that my wife always says is she'll say, "You do you, I'll do me."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Everyone else is taken anyway, so why not?
So you keep doing you. All right.
Right.
Here we go, Alise. Now it's time for our Breakthrough Blitz speed round. So our Breakthrough Blitz is where I ask you a few questions and you give me some brief questions or brief answers that are going to help us really break through. Alise Cortez, are you ready to blitz?
Let's blitz.
All right. So what's your favorite productivity tool or app?
Oh, gosh. Productivity tool or app. I hate to say it, but I guess I would have to say YouTube.
Very good. So what is your favorite way to unwind after a busy day?
I would say drinks with friends or colleagues or clients.
If you could have dinner with any female business leader, living or deceased, who would it be?
You know, this is maybe not the end all be all, but for some reason, people keep telling me that I need to meet the chief people officer of the Mavericks. She's a woman and she's here in Dallas. And for some reason, I'm told I need to meet her. So I think that's where I'm going to go next.
All right. Well, we're going to send out vibes. So hopefully that'll happen for you soon. Okay. So what's your favorite quote or mantra that keeps you motivated?
It's definitely George Bernard Shaw's. I usually use it at the end of my presentation. I don't have a committed memory, but it's, you know, this is the true joy in life, being used for a purpose that recognized for a mighty one. You know, this whole idea that you are being in service in your life for a purpose, and not to be sniveling with things don't actually go your way, or, you know, or things aren't easy. Definitely George Bernard Shaw in that way.
And what is one piece of advice that you would give to aspiring female entrepreneurs?
Plug into a community of other such folks like what you're doing, Jim, with your women. It is essential. Don't go it alone.
All right. So here's our last Blitz question. What is the biggest misconception people have about being a female entrepreneur, and how do you address it in your own experience?
I guess misconception. I suppose the biggest misconception is that she's not going to make it. And how do you address that? One is, you know, you just vow to yourself never to give up. And two, again, back to the whole thing of surround yourself with other people that are doing something similar. The worst thing that you can do is be around the naysayers that tell you not to pursue your dream, not to pursue what you really want. And they have mostly good intentions, but really, you know, they're just trying to protect their own decisions and choices.
Alise Cortez, how do the Cherish and Conquer watchers and listeners get in touch with you?
Easy enough. You can go to my personal website, which is just alisecortez.com. If you go to my business website, which is gusto-now.com, you'll find more resources and things like that. You can always find me on LinkedIn as well. Easy.
Alise Cortez, I've had a great time chatting with you today. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and we wish you the very best.
Thank you, Jim, to you as well.
Thanks for tuning into the Cherish and Conquer podcast from Marina. Join our community of trailblazing women at community.marina.ai and get access to exclusive resources, checklists, and guides. If you found value in today's episode, please rate, review, subscribe, and share it across your social platforms. See you soon, and remember, barriers are for breaking.
Look at me rise above. That's my story.